guys, it's Justine here, and welcome to my very first YouTube video. I decided to start up a channel to go along with my blog and various other bits of social media. It's the beginning of the month, so I thought that a good place to start with for videos would be to take you through some of the books that I have in my TBR pile for September. I am very much a mood reader, so my TBR strategy tends to be pick a ton of books that I'm interested in and then see how I can do. I usually end up reading about 8 or 9 books in a month, sometimes better, sometimes worse. So I will usually pick about 10 to 15 books that I would like to read. So I pulled out 7 for you to see today. Whether I get to them all, who knows, but this is what I'm hoping to read in September. First book, Seizure and Storm, by Leigh Bardugo. It's the second book in the Grisha trilogy. I'm actually kind of cheating with this one because I've already started it. I started it just after I finished Shadow and Bone at the beginning of the month. I am about 88 pages in. I will admit that I'm struggling with this one a little bit. I love Leigh Bardugo. Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom quickly became some of my favorite books that I read this year. Very new to the YA genre, but they were just such a good fit and such a good transition from my reading of adult fantasy into young adult fantasy. I'm not sure I feel the same way about the Grisha trilogy. I think that a lot of the things that made Six of Crows so great are not necessarily present in this trilogy. The romances, the characters, their strengths, the plot, all of that is just not quite there. In a way, I wish I had read this first. In a way, I'm really glad I didn't read this first. So I might put this aside for a little while. I do want to finish it. I'm not going to DNF it, I'm pretty sure. However, I think that it's throwing me a little bit into a reading slump. Might give it a break and pull up something next. So, what we've got next is actually a reread, which is very unusual for me. I don't like to reread books because there's so many books that I want to read, and like many of you probably, I don't have enough time to do so. So I don't reread, but this is going to be an exception. Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. I've actually read the whole Mistborn Trilogy, and I have started the second trilogy. We'll get to that later. It's really one of my favorite series. It's got great characters, not just a great lead character, but also the side characters are just fantastic. They're all well written. It's got one of the coolest magic systems that I have ever read, and it's got a great plot. The idea of the hero who's prophesized to save the world becoming the villain, who is the villain in this book, is just such a cool concept to me, and I really love it. The reason that I'm rereading this is because my book club is actually going to be reading this for October, and I am so excited. Some of my friends are going to be reading it for the first time, so we're all going to meet up in mid-October and talk about it. Some of us are long-established Mistborn fans, some people are newer, so it's going to be really great. So, speaking of Mistborn, the next 2 books on my list are actually Shadows of Self, which is the second book in the second Mistborn trilogy, and Bands of Mourning, which is the third book in the second trilogy. I'm going to be rounding out the Mistborn novels, and I'm very excited. I was inspired by the book club choices. If you don't know, the first Mistborn trilogy is very much a traditional fantasy setting. The second actually takes place about 300 years later in almost like an Industrial Revolution type setting. I read the first one and I liked it. I didn't like it as much as the first trilogy, which is one of the reasons why I haven't gotten around to these books yet. The other reason being that they came out while I was doing my master's. I did a master's in publishing, therefore I was very much booked out. I didn't want to read anything, so they've been sitting on my shelf for a while. One of them is actually signed, but it's about time that I actually get around to reading these books. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. I'm probably going to read these 2 first and then loop back around to Mistborn, The Final Empire. So, next on the list is actually one that I don't really know much about. It's the first in a series, and the second one has just been released actually, and that is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. Sometimes I feel like the only person who hasn't read this book? It seems like it's such a hugely popular book. And the hype surrounding God's Grave, which is the sequel's release, has been pretty intense. I actually have an arc of God's Grave on my Kindle waiting for me, so probably about time that I get around to this. I don't know much about it. I know that it has a lot of things that I like in my fantasy, which is women characters sort of leading the story, assassiny women characters who like to stab and murder people, and it's supposed to just be really cool, very cruel, and will probably make me really upset, which sounds great, so I'm really looking forward to this. Next is, I pause because I didn't actually really like the first book all that much, but I was interested enough to pick up the second, and that is Days of Blood and Starlight by Laini Taylor. I know, controversial to say that I didn't really like Daughter of Smoke and Bone all that much. As I said, I am pretty new to the fantasy genre, or the young adult fantasy genre, therefore I never read Daughter of Smoke and Bone until about a month and a half ago, and there were parts of it that I really, really liked. I think her writing is wonderful. The characters grew on me. I wasn't initially sold on them, but I didn't like the romance, which is pretty problematic in a book that very heavily centers on a romance. And if you've read Daughter of Smoke and Bone, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I really, really did not like the last 100 pages. I know that sounds really random, but what she does is you have this established narrative, like go, 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 and all of a sudden it stops. And you get about 100 pages of backstory, things that happened well before the events that we just read about, but lead up to the events that we just read about. So it's a huge, essentially just an info dump with new characters that I didn't care about. It took me long enough to get to like the main characters in the main narrative. So all of that was just taken away, and then I had the same problem of not really liking these people, not really knowing what to think of them. And then the book ended. So I was a little bit confused, a little bit lost, but I was interested enough to pick up Days of Blood and Starlight. So we'll see what I think. I'm hoping that we do get back to, God, I'm terrible at names, so Kaoru's story, because I do like her. She did take a while to grow on me, but I did like her, and I want to see how things progress. I think I'm mostly interested in what happens to everyone else. Again, if you read the first book, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I am looking forward to this. We'll see how it goes. Since it's a trilogy, I'll probably end up picking up the third book anyway, regardless of what I think, because completionist. The last book that I have, I am super excited about. I have been waiting for this book all year. I started my blog in January, which is when I first heard about this, and it's actually the second book by this author on this list, and it is Wonder Woman Warbreaker by Leigh Bardugo. I am so excited for this book. It's going to be awesome. Wonder Woman, obviously huge in the media right now because of the movie that came out, which was fantastic, which is huge, change of pace for DC films, sorry. She's a great character. I've always liked her. I've read some of the comics and graphic novels about her, even though I'm not a big comic and graphic novel reader, which is why these books, the DC Icons series, of which this is the first, is so smart and is going to be so great because people like me who don't read comics, who don't really like comics, but like the characters and want these storylines, can actually read these books. So I'm looking forward to this. And in case you haven't noticed, I was so excited that I bought the limited edition hardcover from Waterstones that has her signature in the very front. It's very exciting. She is one of my new favorite authors, even though, as I said about Siege and Storm earlier, not really feeling the Grisha trilogy. But that's it. That rounds out my TBR selections. We'll see how many of these books I actually read and how far I deviate off of that. I also have a long list of arcs on my Kindle like any blogger does. I always feel behind on that. So yeah, we'll see how this month goes. If you want to see a more comprehensive list of the stuff that I'd like to read this month, you can check it out on my blog. I'll leave a link to that below. I'll leave a link to all my social media. I'm really looking forward to getting into the BookTube community, WordPress and Twitter and all of these places. I have started kind of weaseling my way into have all been amazing, and I've met some great people, so I'm really looking forward to this. If you are a booktuber or if you're a blogger on WordPress, let me know, leave your links. I would love to follow you on all of your social media. Very enthusiastic person. And I'm looking forward to doing more of these videos. So thanks for watching, and see you later.